There we go. We're live. Hi, guys. How's it going?
Good, good.
So
Happy
thanks for
Wednesday.
Oh, sorry, what was that?
Happy Wednesday.
Happy Wednesday,
Happy
indeed.
third Monday of the week.
Indeed. It's the way it's feeling like, right?
March 683, 2020.
Exactly. So thanks for everybody tuning in. This is the Ask Me Anything that we decided to host as a direct result of the hackathon. So we conducted a hackathon that ran over the course of this past weekend, and we got a ton of questions. And I was talking with the team, and we had kind of figured out that maybe it makes sense to sort of talk this one through because there were a lot of interesting questions that sort of surfaced over the weekend, everything related to architecture, to do you have to build a verifier and an issuer, what the claims look like. So we thought it would make sense to sort of go down this path with Matthias, Hazim, and Rohit. So thanks for joining, guys. I do appreciate it. It was a little bit of a last minute thing, so I'm glad it worked out with everybody's schedule.
Yeah, well, we had nothing to do.
Right, this is true, right? We're all still remote. We're all still working from home, right?
Yeah, well, happy to be here.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So let's just start in, and we'll see what we wind up getting in terms of questions in the chat. So, I think we were originally going to start in on the path of the architecture. So Matthias, did you want to just start in on what that architecture looks like, and Hazim and Rohit can sort of chime in as we sort of unpack what the architecture looks like, because I think that was an initial question that sort of got people a little stumped.
Yeah, I can do that, and we can use that picture to answer some of the questions we all three and some others have been answering during the hackathon as well, right? So let's switch to the
Perfect.
whiteboard so I can zoom in a little bit. So this little picture here on the top is representing our Verifiable Credential service hosted in our data centers, managed through Azure Active Directory. And the most important piece here is the key vault with your private key, which is attached to your DID, the DID. And we can talk about the DID in a little bit, but I think Rohit and Hazim added, but I saw we had some issues where folks had some permission problems, right?
Right.
Yeah.
And,
Not
and the
not
tip,
mainly the permission problems as someone who's going to create this entire setup, like the verifiable credentials, not per se like the permissions for what permissions to give, the verifiable credentials account onto the key vault is pretty clear in the documentation. I think the other part is what's a little bit obscure, is what you
Ye-
do need to actually provision the service.
Yeah, and I think when we say provision a service, there are some base components to it, right? So, what storage account does and what permission is required on that. Key vault, we know it is storing the keys, but why we had an issuer service having a specific permission set, or the service principal having a specific permission set. I am the owner, I created the key vault. So I think those kind of questions were coming on the chat. Like, I created the service, I have contributed access to storage account. So what's the explicit role permission I need on? So I think let's just break it down.
yeah,
Let's
let's
just talk
let's
about
talk
the
about it a little bit, right?
yeah.
So you see this is this service, and I got the APIs or the services inside of this bigger service called out. So one of the things we call from your issuance or verification website is the request API. This one is actually a service principal, if you're familiar with those terms, inside of Azure Active Directory, and that needs access to the key vault. That's one of those services which needs to have get sign permissions on the key and a get permission on the secret. Issuance, that's the piece which actually hands out and signs all the verifiable credentials. That needs access to that key vault as well, because literally every time you do like interaction between the wallet and our service, the traffic has been signed, so that the services creating those messages need access to your key vault. And we saw some folks who actually had issues with that. And I know we call it issuance service, but this entire thing is actually just see it as a DID management environment. I know there was some confusion about it. So if I want to verify, I still need all these pieces because it's not just issuance, it's also verification. And every time we interact with this service, those messages have to be signed with a private key, so we know that all the traffic is secure. So if we see if I can draw a little bit how this works, I don't know how that shows up on the screen, and I zoom out a little bit. If this is my issuance website or issuer, let's just start with the issuer, and it will be pretty much the same for verifier, but start with the issuer. And I got my wallet over here. The first thing we did was calling the request API, and this is where we need like a client ID and a secret. This is because the website needs to be able to call that REST API, the request API. And what we
Or a
pass,
certificate, right? Yeah, or a
and if
client
it,
certificate.
yeah, or clients, well, and or
Yeah.
managed identity. I think
Or
there's a
managed,
show
yeah.
on the 4 to 5 show how to do that as well. You're right. So in the sample we use a secret, but yeah, cert is better. Managed identity is best, right? And when you pass that request, you give that information. For example, I want to issue a credential. So I specify what type of credential, a URL to the credential manifest or contract, a DID. Although we have a single DID right now, but you can imagine in the future, if I can be able to manage, I don't know, several different DIDs because I got 20 different brands, you have to specify for which one this is happening. And optionally, and what we use in the sample, claims. For example, I think we had Megan, what was her last name? Brown?
Bowen.
Bone.
Bowen,
Yeah.
Yeah.
Bowen.
as part of the payload. And what our service then does, it creates an issuance request. And that is stored on our server. So that's a little message issuance request. It's a JWT, a JSON Web Token, signed by the private key.
Okay.
And what we return to this, so this is one, what we return to the issuance website is a URL to this little message. And what we do with that URL is we create a QR code with that URL. So we pass along our information to the request, we generate this little JWT over here, and then we send back a URL to that URL, QR code. The wallet scans that QR code and then downloads that request. And inside that request, it first of all, it checks if it's signed correctly. That will do the little verify thing, or it shows you that the security warning if you didn't do domain verification setup. And inside that request is the ID token hint, which has like Megan Bowen. It has the manifest of the credential or the verifiable credential. That's like the logo, the color, and some text, etc. It might have some other instructions. You want to ask the user to self-attest some information, or maybe sign in to a B2C tenant, or input another verifiable credential. We had several ways of doing that. It collects all information, and if it's done, it will send all that information signed to the issuance API.
Okay.
It checks out if everything is correct, signs it with a private key, and this will send back the verifiable credential, which is then stored in the wallet. That's it.
Yeah. So just to elaborate, as the wallet is going to look at the manifest URL is something you will see in the Azure portal as you are creating credential using a combination of display file and rules file.
Yeah.
So display file, as the name suggests, covers the look and feel of the card. Rules file defines whether you want to do the OIDC flow, which is that going to an identity provider and get yourself an ID token, or you could put in the self-attested model, or you can put in ID token in. So that manifest is something that URL you will see when you create the credential. And
Correct.
the important thing here is Matthias was mentioning that the wallet would download the manifest if someone has not given the right permissions on the storage account. The container of the storage blob data reader permission, wallet won't be able to download that manifest, right? That was another question that kept on coming during the chat. So the best way to look at it is just make sure that manifest URL is accessible on a browser session. So that's what the wallet will be downloading.
Yeah, another issue we've seen is that when I, like the number one, when I do this one, I call the API and the return result is like access denied error. And people put that in the QR code, right? So instead of checking, and maybe that's an error check we have to add to the sample as well, but if there's not an URL pointing to that request, and you make it in a QR code, you scan it with the wallet, like, yeah, that's not, I don't know what to do with it because it's just a text message which says, well, access denied. So we saw people not having done the setup for an app to be able to call the API. That's the app registration, the secret, giving the API permissions. Once that's working, you will get a URL. The next step, which might be wrong, is because I made a mistake in the rules or a display file, so the manifest itself is not structured correctly, so the wallet doesn't know what to do with it. That might be an issue there as well, right? So there's and those are a bit harder to troubleshoot because when you scan a QR code, you see an error in the wallet, you don't know exactly what's going on. So typically, what we recommend is open up the credential in the browser, see if everything is correct. Check if the result from the API call is actually a URL you can open and see what's inside of the request. You can actually download this JOT yourself and see what's inside of there and base it in JOT.ms and see what's in there. You will see the keys of the public key, the issuer, and all that stuff. So there's a few things you can do. For verification, it's almost the same. Instead of we still call that API, but we pass only the type your own did, and typically was it trusted? No, accepted issuers.
Okay.
So it's a bit a different payload, but again, there will be a request. We return a pointer to it. You scan it to the QR code. The wallet will get the instructions. Oh, I have to provide a verifiable credential from this type from any of these issuers. Well, I got a bunch of them, so you have a selection. I got one of them, it will automatically select that one and ask you to present it. And then if you have none of them, it might actually tell you, well, I'm sorry, I don't have anything. Go get that credential first. The little trick I think we have shared on the chat as well, if you just ask for verifiable credential, I know my handwriting is terrible. Every credential issued has its type you defined and verifiable credential. You can actually issue a verifiable credential which has multiple different types. For example, it's a diploma. It's also a Contoso University diploma. And it might actually be a computer science diploma. You can give like all those three types to your verifiable credential. So if like a relying party says, I need a diploma, or no, I want a Contoso diploma, or I want a computer science diploma, you can actually specify the type in the request. But they all will have verifiable credentials. So if you make a mistake, for example, with issuance, you have a typo in the type, and you think, why can't I get a verifiable credential back when I'm trying to select it, right? My type here is, I'm pretty sure it's the right one. It just doesn't work. This is the trick you can do to see what else is there, and you present it. Maybe you say, well, accepted issuers, I'm not going to bother by that right now. I just want to see everything in my wallet. Remove that from your request, ask for the type, and you will set a list of all your credentials in your wallet. You select the one you care about, and then you will see all the data in there, the type and all that stuff. So that's a nice little trick you can use for debugging as well. But yeah, this guy here, the key and key vault, that gave people the most problems because the permissions from the request API and the issuance service was not set up correctly, or people removed the issuer verifiable credential issuer service because they were only verifying. So the name is kind of a bit of an
Confusing.
confusing. We actually asked the team to just call it the Verifiable Credential service because it's no difference between issuance and verification. So
Yeah.
we'll see if we actually have some influence on that design decision.
And I think, calling it out here, the wallet in this instance is Microsoft Authenticator. But there was a question, Matthias, over the course of the weekend where somebody said, do we have to use Microsoft Authenticator? And you said we don't, which actually kind of blew my mind. So do you want to take a second or two? And I mean, because it sounds like they're going to have to massively roll their own. They're going to have to understand the different standards and all of the above. But our service, obviously, if you use it, you're going to be using Authenticator, or at least we would like you to. It'd probably save you a lot of headache. But in the event somebody needed to roll their own, what would they have to pay attention to?
Any of you guys want to answer this one?
I will. So, Shannon, for now, we recommend Authenticator because the wallet work that we have done is part of the Authenticator package.
Okay.
The way Authenticator app will manage the debt for the holder, manage the keys, understands the verifiable credential data format, understands the presentation exchange model, like when I'm using my wallet to accept or issue or verify. So that is part of the wallet work. We, for transparency, we have published the wallet SDK link on the FAQ page, but we are not recommending anybody to use the SDK right
Got
now.
it. Okay.
That is what I would like everyone to follow for now. If there is a change in our stance, we will publish that on our documentation that this is a stable SDK you can use and consume. But for now, you have to use the Authenticator app.
But we do have folks who actually tried to build their own and actually succeeded, right? The thing is that if wallet talks to our service, that's OIDC SIOP v2. Part of the request we sent is called presentation exchange. How you download the credential, the contract, that's called manifest. There's like a bunch of standards we have to support.
Yeah.
These things are still evolving. We're also implementing the new ones. So the traffic between the wallet and our service will change.
Okay.
So that's the main reason. Like you can do it today, but you have to realize that in the future that it might not be working anymore. But yeah, again, for example, if you build a brand loyalty program and you want to issue coupons and all that kind of stuff, which is relevant to your branding or even cross branding, because variable credentials can be used across boundaries, right? Easily. You probably want to offer a integrated solution, and we see customers where they actually start building their own loyalty app, and part of that app has a wallet which can actually receive those credentials. So there's very good reasons for folks to want to build their own wallet. Honestly, what Rohit just said, and if we are doing proof of concept with our customers, when you just start with the wallet from us, the Authenticator app. It works. It's a really good user experience already. And make sure that everything works. But yeah, nobody's preventing you from doing your own thing. But
It just
again,
sounds
you
like
have
it's
to
a lot
start
more
from
work.
scratch.
Right.
Yeah.
Right.
And
And you need
sometimes
to iterate
necessary.
as well. And you need to iterate as well. So see the specifications. If there is an addition to the specification, we'll implement that in our Authenticator app. But then somebody who has made a custom wallet, they have to implement that change as well as part
Right.
of the flow. Yeah.
And there are some security concerns when you do the interaction between the services and the wallet, and between the relying parties and the wallet, etc. So it's not that different than the advice you folks have been giving to the identity developers, right? Don't try to implement OAuth and OIDC yourself, because you might get it to work, but you're probably not sure if it's going to be secure.
Right.
And you have to stay on top of it, because, like, insights
It evolves.
change, right? There's a new
Right.
attack factor. You have to mitigate with a few extra things you have to do. So you're signing up for security work for the rest of your career, which is a great career, but it's probably not what you
It's a lot
sign
of
up
work.
for. Yeah.
Right. So we've got a couple of questions here. So I think over on the Microsoft Developer channel, we have I guess it's a question. The idea of, is there going to be B2C showing up in the sample apps? And I think that's in the works, right?
Yes. If you
That's
look at the
right.
branches, you can actually see an updated sample already, and we are about to merge that hopefully this week.
Great. That's awesome. So I think that'll get folks excited. And then I think it's just one of those things where Christos and I and the team will come up with a way to put that into the 425 show GitHub repo. we'll experiment, play around with that. Could be a future session.
Yeah, so this sample, what we will do is like the first sample is just about calling the API, right? And we do this Megan Bowen hard-coded. The second sample will be about be able to sign in your website to an IDP, and we use B2C in this case because it's so easy to set up and sign up for a new account and all that. But it can be any OADC endpoint, and what we do after you sign in, we retrieve your first name, last name from the ID token. The thing is, we didn't do that at first. It's a bit harder to set up because you have to configure an app with a redirect URI, but your app still needs to be accessible from the internet for the callbacks we do. Oh, by the way, that was actually some issues we saw with some folks as well, right? Where the callbacks didn't work because I was one person with SSL was not set up correctly, so our service was not able to call his reverse proxy because there was some root CAs and all that stuff was missing. But once we do it, we have to be able to call back. So do a redirect on localhost and be able to do a callback involves a bit more setup. So we're waiting for that. On top of that, I think there's a lot of questions. Well, B2C is a big beast, right? You can do a ton of stuff.
Right.
This will be the first one, but there are also already on the GitHub repo B2C policies where you can actually sign in and sign up for a verifiable credential on top of B2C. So, you know, you can like sign up for an account with a username and password. You can add your social account. You can add a verifiable credential to your profile as well. And the next time you can sign in with that verifiable credential. Again, I'm not a B2C expert at all. I know enough about it that I understand that I have to ask for help when I want to do something B2C. But
I do too. I do too. Yeah.
Yeah. Maybe just if I have to tell and steal the thunder, what we are doing in the B2C poly is calling the issuer as a claims provider. So as the sample goes live, we can do a double click with the audience.
Very cool. I think that might be something which could be a future stream, and we could kind of unpack what that looks like. Because I think that's like in our Discord server, that's what most people are asking questions about is how to set up B2C, how to do custom claims. So I think when the time comes and, you know, we know who to bug, right? It's gonna be Rohit. That's what it sounds like.
Oh, did I sign up for it?
Well, and
Rohit he'll be out of office, right?
Yeah.
We have two generic ways to get information inside of the verifiable credential, right? And ID token and ID token hint. What we do with the API, when you specify the payload, Megan Bowen, first name, last name, and we send that up to the server, that's already part of the request. You download this authenticator. We call it ID token hint. It's signed. It's all blah blah blah, secure and all that stuff. You can also configure an OADC endpoint, where a well-known endpoint, where you actually have to sign in inside of the authenticator with your username and password or whatever is set up with B2C or something else. And then we get an ID token in return, just regular OADC sign in. And we can actually use information from that ID token. First name, last name, email, pretty straightforward, but I don't know, diploma, your GPA, your, I think we saw someone like an immunization status.
Yeah.
That's probably not part of your directory. I know that B2C can actually do call outs and get all that information, but maybe it's easier for you in your issuance website to do your coding magic, retrieve all the information.
Aggregate
and then stamp it.
Yeah. So
one of the questions actually I got is, is there a way to use those different types of attestations in combination with one another? Like you would request an ID token, and at the same time you would request another verifiable credential to be able to issue this one.
Yes, you can, like self-attested verifiable credential and an ID token, but you have to choose between ID token and ID token hint. We talked to the engineers. Well, we can do all. If you want multiple ID tokens, if you really hate your customers, you can actually ask them to sign in like 2 or 3 times inside of your wallet.
Yeah.
But for now, it's just a single ID token or ID token hint. If you need more, like I want an ID token hint and I want people to sign in, let us know, and then we can make that feature request. But for now, that's not possible. There's either one. But you can, what Azim said, you can do the VC and the self-attested and the ID token at the same time.
But just to share, based on our customer conversations, I may have fat fingers and I may struggle punching in my password on the phone, right? So we have seen customers preferring the ID token in flow. That way, all the magic happens when I am already signed in, or the issuer website is doing the aggregation for me. And then I am just maybe doing a pin supply on that screen, and then I'm good with getting my VC on the phone. Just
Cool.
an experience that we are getting from the customers.
Makes sense.
Yeah,
So,
it's
we've got another couple of questions here. Um, I'm going to botch it. It's SAHILDANGE. I'm not even going to try to pronounce it. I'll probably botch it. Well, I guess it's more like a statement. The issuance service needs to be integrated with OpenID to stamp necessary attributes in verifiable credential service. Is that? It sounds like that's the case, right? Or is there maybe something we should potentially unpack a bit more?
So what we do, we have a model where we can reach out to an OpenID Connect endpoint. That's what we
Okay.
call ID token flow. And if you have seen some of the scenarios that we mentioned, that in the rules file you define that well-known endpoint. That could be Azure AD, B2C, or any third-party UIDC endpoint. You define a client ID that can facilitate that ID token end process, and then you can get verifiable credentials with an IDP ID token inflow as well. So that's possible even today. Maybe we'll have to understand that statement a little bit more.
Yeah, so I guess feel free to write a little bit more in the chat.
And
Maybe
what
that's an
our
opportunity.
issuance service does, so Authenticator collect all the information. It sends the ID token and all the other stuff to our issuance service. We will then go to the well-known endpoint to retrieve the public key from that IDP and make sure that the ID token is signed correctly, so people just don't, try to mess up that issuance flow with their own custom ID tokens. And it will check if the ID token is well formatted, it's signed correctly, and all that kind of stuff. So yeah, I don't know if that's what they talk about. I don't know what protocol. I didn't really catch the protocol or the signing signature
Yeah,
stuff, but
so maybe that's an opportunity for the user to type a little bit more in the chat. If that didn't answer your question, we can go a little bit deeper if you've got additional pieces that you want to have answered. So then we've got SK1PIO has asked, is it best practice to mandate two-factor authentication from the very start? Would you call this two-factor authentication? What would you call this?
I think the comment was like, as I am using Authenticator app, should I have biometric or uh, Face ID configured on the phone? Because I'm going to use the app, that could be for a wallet scenario with verifiable credential, or an MFA or a passwordless scenario when it is going to a centralized IDP flow. So yeah, it is a good practice to have these scenarios enabled. You can obviously configure it through your endpoint management policies powered through Intune. So yeah, as a enterprise rollout practice, yes, you should configure these kind of small.
Cool. So I know when we were in the middle of the hack, somebody had asked the question of, if you're just building a verifier and you're not building an issuer, do you need to configure both? And I think that was a question that the hacker figured out, right, by way of Matthias and Rohit sort of helping him out. But I don't know if you wanted to talk a little bit more about how the actual setup works. So, because there's probably going to be people that just issue, and there's probably going to be people that just verify. So, what would that setup look like for those specific companies?
Think about the setup you do is a DID management environment. Everybody needs the DID. And it's one for now, right? There's one tenant, one DID. And in the future, we might add some support for multiple DIDs, but you have one DID with one private key. And that's what the service manages and what is using to sign traffic. Doesn't matter if you're an issuer or if you're a verifier, that process is the same. So you're setting
Okay.
up your DID management environment, and either you are an issuer and then you have to create a credential with your storage account and all that, or you're a verifier. You only need access to that API and make sure that the request you're trying to generate can be signed by the private key. So the service, both of the service principals, the request API one and the issuer service, which we should rename to Verifiable Credential Service, all need access to your key vault to be able to sign those messages.
Okay.
Issuance or verification in that sense is just all the same.
Okay.
And we expect, honestly, like 99% of the developers in the end will be a verifier, and a small set of folks will be issuing. It's like most people just sign in users; they don't create new accounts, right?
Right.
So
Right. Makes sense. So then, do you want to talk a little bit about the idea of one DID per Azure Active Directory tenant? Because when I was going through this process, I was literally like, okay, wait, I've got 15 different credential types, but it's all the same DID. Do you want to talk a little bit about why and what that relationship looks like? Because that might be something that could be curious to folks who are trying to figure out how does this actually work. So I don't know who wants to answer that one. But I know it was a question that got popped up over the course of the hackathon.
Yeah.
You see, the credential is more like a definition, right? So what the credential tells you when you would go through that flow of getting a blue card, what kind of label I'll get on the card, and what kind of attestation process I need to go through it. Uh, as a actor, which is an issuer in the current state, we assign a DID as a part of this VC service installation, and right now we only do one DID. So when I am signing that VC, I need to make sure I have a set of keys that I can use. I'll sign the VC using my private key, and I'm making my public key available in the DID document, which is managed by the VC service for you. Uh, so if you ask me, there is no such direct correlation between one DID that we have today in a issuer versus 15 credential files, because those are schema definitions. You may have a student card, a degree, diploma, or a particular attribute only, like a date of birth card. So there is no such correlation between issuer DID and the credential schema.
Okay.
As an actor, I need a DID, I need a pair of keys. I'll be signing the credential using my private key, and I need to submit the public key that is available to verifiers. And VC service helps you do that management. So we will help you push that JSON document, anchored or non-anchored, and it's available so that a verifier can pull it, get the public key, get the endpoint, and do the private key public key magic, understand the credential, and then take the payload, which was defined as a definition in the schema. Does it help?
I think so. That actually makes a little bit more
Yeah.
sense to me.
You want to see what a DID actually is? That might be helpful
Yeah,
here as
let's do
well.
that.
So
Here,
if you
I'll
can,
flip to your desktop. Yep.
so this is the DID I actually copied from my portal, right? It's a very long string, and we call this string a so-called long form DID. There's two pieces here, but what's inside? What's a DID represent? Well, the DID can be resolved through our IAM node. We run one in our data center, well, several ones, honestly. There's other ones around the world. I run a few at home on my Raspberry. But what it can do is it can resolve this DID to something we just called a DID document. So if I go to Iron Explorer, and we can share the URL, and I'll search for this DID, and it will resolve the DID to a DID document. There's an ID, there's a base, there are some domains, and I happen to, oh, that's the wrong button I just pressed. Oh, come on. Let's refresh the page. Sorry about that. I hit the back button by accident. I have several domains configured. We are testing a new feature. Scroll in a little bit. So this is what we are using for the verified thing. We retrieve a domain. We'll check a well-known document to see if you actually own the domain and make that match. Your public key, this is the important piece people are using to make sure that the signatures are correct. So yeah, this is all what you can get from a single DID. The DID is a very long string, right? And since we need to write the DID to the IAM network, it takes some time. So what we do is initially we start with a long form DID, we call it. But as you can see, there's two parts if it's separated by the semicolon. This is actually your DID. This is the short form DID. This is all you need to resolve. So if I would copy paste this one in the IAM Explorer, let's see if I'm not lying. And I resolve it, I will see the same DID document.
Oh, okay.
So what does the rest mean? Well, it's actually initial state. So if I pick up this piece, and it's base64 encoded, so we happen to have websites where you can just decode that for you. I can't do it out my head yet. You can see, look, it's just a bunch of JSON encoded. And if I paste this in something where we can actually read it, where's my code? and I do the magic button. No, that's not it. What was it again? Alt window. There you go. And I do zoom in a little bit. You see the same stuff we actually had from the document up in the Iron Explorer. So this is all in this initial state, because when we created
Okay.
it for the first time, we didn't commit that transaction to the Iron network yet. And committing that transaction can take up to an hour. But meanwhile, you want to be able to verify messages signed by my private key. So what we do in the initial creation of the DIT is we create this long form that includes my public key. And at some point in time, we will commit it to the network. And you should be able to use the short form as well, right? But this is how it works. And if I have what's the advantage of the short form is, well, if I would happen to update my private key and my public key, I can write to that network, and after a while, all that updates, or I would change my domain, for example. I change my domain, and at some point in time, that will be replicated to the IAN network, and everybody trying to resolve that DIT will have the latest version of that DIT document. But to have that initial state, that's why we use this long form DIT. But if you want to store something as a key, to uniquely identify that user, the only thing you have to store is this. This will be the same always.
Interesting. Now you were saying something, Matthias, about how there might be at some point where, there's multiple DIDs per Azure Active Directory instance. Is that a thing, or is that just, you're trying to figure out how the service is going to evolve?
Yeah, at the moment it's not. It might be in the future, depending on customers asking for it. But think about it. Most organizations, but there are like a few large organizations, they own maybe like 50 different brands, and all their brands need to be represented by a single DIT because they want to be uniquely identifiable. They might need it. You don't want them to set up 50 Azure Active Directory tenants if they don't need to. So that might be a reason to do it. But most organizations are probably fine with a single DIT.
Okay.
Maybe you have to test the acceptance environment, all that, but I don't think it's a bad practice to have several tenants for those anyway. But
sure,
if you feel like you need to have support for multiple ones, let us know. In the end, we try to build what our customers are asking, and there's a lot of stuff we still want to do, and at some point we have to prioritize that work.
Yeah, makes sense. So now, if somebody were to revoke a credential, what does that workflow look like, or what does that process look like?
So in the current state, when we talk about revocation, at the time you are defining your schema, the credential definition, you need to have one of the attributes that are indexed.
Okay.
So when you are, if you would remember in the the files that you had set up, you would have specified the mapping for claim value. In that, there is an option where you can specify whether that particular claim can be indexed yes or no. So that's one of the basic things as in credential definition person you need to have in mind. In the current state, the way we have implemented is uh, we look at a attribute called as credential status in the issued verifiable credential, and it's that particular attribute gets populated with a status API that we are managing right now on your behalf. So when you are, let's say, as an admin trying to revoke a credential, and let's say I have kept email address as the identifier that will be indexed, which is unique in my organization. So as an admin for that particular credential definition, let's say I want to revoke Rohit's employee card, which was issued to Rohit. I know that his email address is x and y at microsoft.com. So I will use that indexed attribute as a queries for my search string. I will, from the admin interface, get a list of credentials that were issued to Rohit, and then I will hit on a revoke command. All we are doing is looking at and updating that attribute that I mentioned that we are managing on your behalf. Uh, and then basis that that particular credential will be revoked. So now revoke doesn't mean that we will be able to delete the credential from the wallet. The credential will still be in the user's wallet, but
Okay.
as the user goes and presents that credential to a verifier, at that time the verifier will do a lookup and verify what's the credential status. Is it revoked or is it active? So basis that, a verifier can actually take a decision and accept or deny the presentation.
This actually introduces interesting challenges for the platform as well, right? So you revoke a credential or you don't revoke a credential, the APIs will check that for you. But
Okay.
take the case where you and Christos deleted the credential service and
We
we
did.
created a new one. At that point, the entire service is brand new. The old one doesn't exist anymore. You issued Verifiable credentials, a bunch of them before that, right? So they try to still call back, like when you try to present it, the API wants to verify the status of that Verifiable credential, but that service doesn't exist anymore. So what happens? What do you do with that credential? Like we know the credential is valid, the signature. So well, no, you can't even create the old DID is still on the network, so I can actually
Yeah.
check if the public key with the public key of the signature correct. Yep, the Verifiable credential checks out. Now I want to see if it's revoked, yes or no. But that endpoint I have to talk to figure that out doesn't exist anymore. So you're kind of in limbo with that Verifiable credential. And as a relying party, you now have to make a decision. Am I okay
Right.
with that credential? Although it cannot be checked for revocation. So it's an interesting use case where you have to figure out what you expect to do, right? So it's the same as what things we try to figure out what the right thing is to do. If I create this credential in my portal, right? So user rules file, display file, and you might have noticed that there's no delete button.
Yeah.
What should happen if I delete it? Because I click on the credential, that's where I can revoke credentials. So maybe I should
Right.
deactivate. But what if I actually delete it? Can I still do a status check of the issued verifiable credentials, or what should I do? Or should all the credentials you have issued for that type should those be revoked? I don't know what it should be. That's probably some hopeful folks who are listening can answer. But it's sometimes like, well, why are we doing? It's me, right? Why are you guys not doing a delete? And then they say, well, we got us a bunch of questions we don't have an answer for yet. So what do you think? And then ooh,
Yeah.
I don't know. So we'll work with customers and ask them what they think the right behavior is. And maybe there's multiple options. We don't know, but yeah, we have to figure
Yeah.
that out. So
Makes sense. Makes sense. So, Matthias, I know we've shared this a couple of times. This is the link tree that the team has put together. So it's all of the different standards. It's kind of all of the links to everything that we've sort of been talking about. And I think everybody has liked seeing this link. So for the new time or the new joiners, people who haven't checked out any of the other streams, you're able to take a look at some of the links that we've been talking through, and it just outlines it pretty effectively so that you can get a feeling for how this all works together.
Yeah.
so the good
Just one
news for the
comment.
develop. Oh, go ahead. Sorry.
No, I was just making a comment on that link tree. The reason we have created this aggregation, so that everyone can just come to this single interface and see what specifications we have implemented or we are considering or we are reviewing. So it's not that if the specifications that you see in this list all are implemented. No, we are reviewing some of those. Some of them are implemented. If you go to our documentation's FAQ page, you will see the specifications that we have already implemented. I just want to
Okay.
make
Oh,
sure that
that's good.
everybody, yeah,
That's good to know. So I guess I didn't realize that. So I'm glad you called that out.
The good thing is for the developers who are using our REST API, they don't have to worry about this, right? So if we are implementing SIOP, OIDC SIOP v2 or v1, if we are using presentation exchange or not, from a developer perspective, just calling the REST API with a payload, we take care of that, right? We create the request in the right format and make sure that the right version of Authenticator with our APIs is all in sync, so there's no issues for you or for your users. So it's kind of a nice. So I know that some folks like, no, I want to know the nitty-gritty details and all the protocol stuff. From an API perspective, at the moment, there's no change for you because we take care of that and we'll make sure that everything is formatted and handled in the right way. So
Got it. Okay. So I know there was another question about session time with sign-in for the verifiable. I don't remember exactly what that question was, but did you want to talk a little bit about the session time and the fact that it's not really reliant upon the API? It's more so some of the stuff that people have to factor in. Do you want to talk a little bit about that? Because I don't see any questions that are popping up in any of
Who wants
the.
to pick this one up? I can talk forever, but
We will let you. You have completed 20 years recently, right? So think
Yeah,
about
we
it.
should. We should.
dude, I've
So,
talked enough for 20 years, so no.
for the folks just tuning in, Matthias just celebrated his 20-year anniversary at Microsoft. So he's going to get either the really big trophy or a couple of other things he has a choice from. So I feel like the trophy just gets bigger and bigger. Isn't it like almost life size at 20 years?
I've seen the one for 35 years as well. We have one. I think with one colleague who has actually 40 years at the company, so I'm
Oh,
halfway.
wow.
Now
So
for
we'll
the
send you the
session.
invoice. Yeah.
So right now, there's no way for the wallet to present that verifiable credential directly to some kind of endpoint to sign in. So typically what happens if instead of a username password, which you should not do, but I know people still do that, instead of a username password screen, you build a give me a verifiable credential screen. And then you can do whatever logic you want. Like, okay, I'm going to ask you for a verifiable credential you issued, was issued by your work, for example. And I'm going to allow that. And if it checks out, I'm going to say like, well, sign in is true. And in that case, it's just regular website development, right? If you use username password, you say, well, those two match, sign in is true. If you present a variable credential in the way we have shown you, like with the request and all that stuff, you show the QR code, you use the QR code, and then, yeah, checks out, signed in is true. It's literally the same. So we don't determine session on anything because we don't even know what you're trying to build, right? So
Right.
if you want to use B2C and modify the B2C, we have B2C policy where you can actually sign in with a variable credential. It's all B2C stuff. There's no difference in that sense from us. You might think a little bit about, well, a verifiable credential is maybe expires in a day. I don't want to have it longer, a session longer than that one, for example. Or do I accept a revoked verifiable credential? We have scenario would be, can you maybe you have a driver's license which is revoked? Can you still sign in or prove that you're 20 years old? Or maybe you have an old workplace verifiable credential, but you quit and you're an alumni now, right? So you accept revoked. I don't know if that's a right good
No.
example, but as a relying party, you decide what you seem fit to fulfill your sign-in requirements, and then set up your session in whatever way you want.
Makes sense. Makes sense. Okay.
Right.
So CodePuter writes, can we talk about the application manifest? I think this was a little bit confusing in the sample. CodePuter then goes on to state, I want to take more control over the process to understand the flow end to end. So he or she, they was not able to join earlier. They were not able to join earlier. So maybe that, okay. And this is, I'm thinking of starting with the application manifest is a good place to start. Is that kind of the direction you would recommend? He, him. Okay, cool. So I don't
I'm
know.
not sure what the confusion was on the manifest though. There's not a lot of information in there besides, well, this is how the card looks like. And then you have like some of the rules, like this is the information I need to collect. So that's how I try to split it up, right? Display file, look and feel, which claims do you want to store inside of the credential, and then the rules file. How do you get all that information and map it to that schema?
Sure.
So the rules file is about using an ID token or using another VC or self-attested, collect those information and map those collected claims to your verifiable credential, which is configured in the display file. That's typically how I split those two up.
And the URL, the configuration URL depends on that scenario. So if it's like an IDP flow, it's the well-known endpoint for the OIDC service. If it's ID token hint, you might have seen self issued me a URL in the rules file. So these are the two distinctions that you will see as you start playing with it. I think what we have done now, Matthias, you can correct me, in our sample repo, we have put in samples for credential files as well for various scenarios, right? So folks, if you would like to see the variation in the GitHub repo, please go to that credential files folder, and you'll see the specific containers with sample files.
Yep. That's
Very
the
cool.
nice short one. Yep. And we got the P2C policies there. There's a few credential files and links to all the other samples, .NET, Java, and all that. So yeah, I hope that helps.
There's another question on what about adding a layer of multi-factor authentication? What do you what would
I
be
assume
this?
that I assume that means using verifiable credentials as an MFA provider or like something like that. Do you mean it's instead using some sort of MFA before you can issue the credential? I assume it's the first
Yeah. So
one.
take like if you see is a credential form, how would you recommend? What would you recommend? Just assume that's what they meant. Well, what would you recommend them to do?
Yeah, we would we like you can set up your OpenID Connect, for example, or like OpenID Connect provider to require a verifiable credential as a sort of MFA before signing in. So you would have like a multi-step user journey or something like that, where before you are issued the token, you have to go through a bunch of steps. One of them could be first give me username and password, then give me the verifiable credential, that proves that you actually have been issued that credential. So that's something that you could do, and I think this is one of the samples that we actually have in the that are going to be pushed soon in the B2C the GitHub samples that for verifiable credential.
And then in some scenarios, just having the verifiable credential might be good enough, right? So I don't think it's the same as a login and password, because I cannot try a verifiable credential from the other side of the world, while I actually can use a username and password to get into the service. So if you only allow verifiable credentials, you actually have to own the device to be able to present that, right? So that might be a good enough security factor.
You either have it or you don't. Yeah,
Exactly.
It's nothing. There's nothing to try. Yeah.
There's just one experience, like in your user journey. If you're doing the OIDC flow and your provider has implemented MFA, let's say Azure MFA was implemented, that could be an experience you may need to think of. Like, I am signing in already, and then I am doing a passcode match on the same interface as a user screen. How would the user see that? So I would also keep user journeys in mind as we design the flow when a user is going through this VC experience.
Makes
And
sense.
I think it's good to think of like the entire use case is verifiable credential is probably something that you want to use when you don't want the user to provide a username and password. It's like something that happens quickly on the go. It just that intrinsically proves that this user carries a certain certificate or proof of permission or something like that. Not like because like it shouldn't be used, I guess, as a form of everyday like authentication or for a use case like multi-factor or something.
Makes sense. So CodePeter also recommends tunnel relay, not just NROC, right?
Yeah,
Tunnel relay.
NROC is not the only one. And there's several out there. I like those kind of tips, and we'll definitely check it out.
Yeah.
I actually start using Nginx at home with a Raspberry, where I can just map everything to my environment, especially when you start using custom IDPs and several websites. It's kind of convenient, but you have to have a static IP address, right? Or at least a public addressable. But yeah, whatever you folks like, I would love to hear your experience on different reverse proxies. App services. I want to send my kid to college, so please use app services and pay for it.
No, but I can use the free tier if I'm just developing, right? So I like the VS Code extension. I could easily deploy it to an app service. So free tier is good enough.
Makes sense. So Sahil has asked, why are we forcing the user experience to display the rules files and the display files in Azure storage with all the permissions complexity? Do you guys want to talk about that?
Matthias already answered that. He wants to send his kid to the university just because
yeah, so
of
that's
that.
That's why.
I honestly, perfect question. I'm gonna snip this one. I'm gonna send it to one of the engineers, because we actually asked the same question, and And we have been going through this setup with a lot of our customers when we are doing the proof of concepts. And yeah, sometimes we struggle with the Azure permissions, right? And especially if you're new, or maybe you're not the owner of the subscription, it's always a pain in the butt. It's probably I assume it's a cost thing why they did it. Like you own your own storage instead of us owning the storage. I wouldn't be surprised if that would be done by us at some point to make this less complex, or at
Yeah.
least to be starting like that. And then you like maybe at some point we can actually do the same with the keys for Key Vault, although people kind of like their private keys. But like say we start by owning all that stuff, put it in our system, and then you press a button, no, I want to take ownership, and then you choose to take the complexity. I think that would be a good model to have, but it is not right now. Sorry about that.
And then Rohit had to drop for something that it goes live at the hour. So he did not drop because he didn't want to listen to Matthias's speech, right? He actually had another commitment that he was trying to rope you into. You guys are quite busy these days.
Yes.
Then let's see. Is there any other questions? Let's see. So yeah, so no, I don't see any unanswered questions outside of the fact that so Sahil also asked, can we have a working end-to-end? Oops, hang on. There's some chat going on here. Can we have a working end-to-end sample with the Azure B2C IDP integration? Which that's going to be in the
Yep.
sample, right? Okay.
Yep.
Just wanted to call that out there because I think that's the major one.
Well, so the sample we will do is we sign in with B2C to the website, retrieve information from the ID token, and then just call the API like we did with backend bow and hard coded, and that's going to be more dynamic. If you want to be able to use B2C as an OIDC endpoint inside of the wallet, go to our sample GitHub repo, and there's credential files, and I think the ID token credential files, that's the one which actually use B2C as an IDP. So you can sign in as a user inside of the wallet. And then we have the B2C policies where you can, I don't know, modify how B2C itself behaves if you care about those. And those are in the repo as well in the B2C directory.
Okay. Then we've got, I think, one last question here. Damien posted, let's see, looking at SSI, the way forwards seem to be systems which converges on BBS Plus, DIDCOM V2, and PSYOP. It is hard to implement a successful cross system. What's Microsoft's view and strategy here?
Yeah, it's too bad Rohit had to drop off because he's actually working on this actively. So it's a great question, and for the folks who are not familiar with all those terms, there's a lot of different standards. It's a great thing of standards is there's so many to choose from, right? So BBS Plus is a way of be able to. I dumb things down. So sorry if I oversimplify, but for example, I don't want to present all the claims in the Verifiable credential. I just want to select a few of them. You can't do it today because if you remove stuff from your Verifiable credential, the signature won't be correct anymore, right? So there's a reason why we have those signatures. You don't want people to tamper with it, but you need a way to. Well, I only want to, I don't know, tell you that I'm older than 21 without presenting my entire address and date of birth. So this is one of those implementations which you can deal with. We're still trying to figure out which one is best for us. DIDCOM is a different way to have the conversation between the wallet and the services, and we have chosen OIDC PSYOP, and we are moving to PSYOP v2. The problem Damien's catching here is like, well, if everybody's doing different things, how can you at some point have some kind of intro? That's a good question, and we'll see some people start bridging. We'll have a few blog posts out in the future where we explain the choices Microsoft made and why. And I think one of the initiatives is if we can come up with a specific set and combination of protocols and standards, and say that we call it like a profile, and you see it in the Bluetooth world already, right? So, and I implement this profile, that means that I should be able to talk to other systems who have implemented this profile as well. And then I see a profile as a set of combination of different standards you have implemented in a certain way. So I'm using IAN, I'm using PSYOP, I'm using JOTS for my Verifiable credentials, etc. So that's probably the way we have to try to find out if we can interop with other folks. And again, it's new, right? We have to figure out which protocols, which standards are working for what scenarios, and what works best and what not. So And sometimes you have to wait for a standard to mature. Sometimes you're going to be ahead of an implementation of the standard because we don't know yet exactly what the right way of doing it is. And once we have done a few implementations and projects with customers, we realize, oh, wait a minute, this is actually something we need to add or change in the standard to make it work for our customer scenario. So it's a very fluent and dynamic world. Very interesting for us because it's never stops changing. I can also see why it can be overwhelming for our customers because of that.
Sure.
Great
So
question.
I think that brings us to the top of the hour. So what I will do here is I will go and I will raid somebody that's live. I don't have anybody live at the moment. Oh no. I think what we'll do is we'll just end this. Yeah, because I took a look at all of the 425 show folks that we follow. Nobody's live at the moment. Maybe it's the Wednesday blues, right? Middle of the week. It's hump day. So all right. Well, any last closing words from you two?
You want to go first?
No.
I just like the enthusiasm during the hackathon and all over, but people asking the right questions and finding issues. We actually filed a few bugs for the engineers. We have shown a few solutions already, and people are very enthusiastic. It's always nice for the engineers to see what kind of crazy stuff people try to build on top of what they've been working on so hard, right? This is actually a project they've been incubating for the last almost 6 years. So yeah, we love it when folks actually are using it and coming up with all the stuff, and the feedback and the questions are amazing. So yeah, thank you for that.
Keep them coming. Keep them coming, right? All right. Well, thanks guys for joining. I'm going to end this now. There's nobody live at the moment that I can see, so we'll just drop off and stay tuned.